First, I wanted to ask you about President Trump. He's been away on a foreign trip, his first big foreign trip, but this Russia story just doesn't want to go away. We had John Brennan, former CIA director, testifying this week. We had news from the Washington Post that Trump may have tried to lean on a couple of high-level intelligence leaders to say there wasn't collusion between the campaign. What does this mean politically in Washington?
Well, so I think there was some hope on the Republican side that the appointment of Mueller as a special counsel would take a little bit of pressure off this issue. They wouldn't be having to answer questions about it every day. They could point to the fact that there's something like an independent investigation going on. But I think what we saw this week is that there's, there's going to be a continual kind of drip on this story. There's going to be developments with the congressional investigations, which are more public. There are going to be leaks. And then the final wild card is just how President Trump reacts to everything that's going on, whether we see more outbursts on Twitter from him. I mean, he's kind of kept his powder dry this week, being abroad. But that's the other wild card in all this, is just how he deals with this issue that's not going away, which is intensely frustrating for him. Did
it help him to be abroad this week?
I think it did a little bit, but that doesn't solve his long-term problem.
Right.
And a lot of consternation on the part of Republicans going into these midterm elections. There's a lot of wild cards. They're not going to know. They're not going to be able to know with any confidence going into the election cycle, how this issue is going to affect them and what shoes are going to drop.
So in the meantime, the budget was released by the Trump administration, and in Congress it appears, as they often do, to be dead on arrival. But there's also this interesting split in the Republican Party now over, we saw it in the healthcare debate. Are we likely to see that again in the budget debate?
Yeah, I think there is that potential, obviously, between Republican moderates and Republican conservatives, and also between the House and the Senate Republicans. I think there's a sort of fundamental question about the political popularity of the overall kind of Republican approach of some spending austerity and cuts alongside tax cuts that are weighted toward higher income earners. And in the past, Republicans have, in the recent past, they've been able to pass these budgets, but they're political documents. They haven't actually been budgets with teeth because they haven't had the power. And now they have to worry about sort of how these budgets are going to be received if they're actually adopted. And then secondarily, you have the differences and just the challenge, like we saw with healthcare, of getting the party itself internally to agree on some of these things. And these budgets go much further than even some of the Republican conservative budgets have in the past. And then finally, there's the question of whether the numbers add up. There's a lot of questions about this budget, about how they're accounting for the fiscal impact of the tax cuts and the kind of assumptions they're making about economic growth and what's going to happen to revenues. Big questions about that.
And that's sort of the pathway of the budget to eventually getting to tax reform, right?
Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of arcane process issues here that have to do with, to get to step B, you have to go through step A, and that involves passing a budget. We saw that with healthcare too. There's these little windows for legislating, and depending on whether you capture that window or not and get things done on a certain timetable, it affects, the legislative hurdles, how high the bar is, how many votes you need, and what it takes to get it through the House and the Senate.